we're here to talk about Rachel Carson, known for her many books, many books, and other pieces of writing, but her main book, Silent Spring, which everyone has probably heard of, at least seen it, heard someone talk about it. But anyway, so let's get into it. Ms. Tonn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi. My name is Angela Tonn, and I am a biology teacher and AP biology teacher here at Cross Keys. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Agnes Scott College, double majored in biology and psychology, and master's degrees from Georgia State in education and biology. And I've been a high school teacher for 32 years, which is a little frightening to say. It really is. It frightens me. It went by very rapidly because I remember starting. I still remember those first years very vividly, and people saying, "No, did you mean to be a teacher?" And well, no, not really. I just majored in what I was good at. And I was in grad school, and I read an article in the paper that said they were just desperate for science teachers, and that they could sort of fast track your certificate if you did a summer program. So I was already in grad school anyway, so I just added that on. And started teaching, and I was always say my first few years, I'm just doing this for a while. Mm-hmm. It's my public service, And 32 years later, I'm still here. So.
Well.
And I'm lucky. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really a lot of fun. And I love biology, and I love to talk about it. So I really get paid to talk about one of my passions every day.
I mean, that's what a job in the best outcome should be. You talking
Amen.
Or doing or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
What you care about the most. It's
mm-hmm. So I'm excited to be here and talk about one of the most famous women in science.
Yes.
There are several others that are just incredibly remarkable. Everybody knows about Marie Curie, or very famous, and my personal hero, Rosalind Franklin, the famous Photo 51. But of all of them, you just can't talk about women in science without mentioning Rachel Carson.
Yeah.
Her contribution, we changed everything.
Right.
And that is a wonderful, wonderful legacy.
Mm-hmm. And
for
we're
a
going
woman.
Into spring now, and the birds are back.
Yeah.
They're singing, and that's.
Yeah, maybe we should start with mentioning that. The name of the book, I think, is Silent Spring. She wrote many books, but I think you said in the introduction, the one most people are familiar with. And what she was referring to would be a spring without birds.
Right.
Because this book is primarily about pesticides, the effects of pesticides, and how contamination moves up the food chain and winds up affecting, the bug that ate the plant gets eaten by the birds, and these. I hate this word because people use it all wrong, but I'm going to use the word toxin. Please don't shoot at me. I do.
Most of the people listening to this are my family, which is kind of embarrassing in itself. That primarily, probably 90% of the people listening are related to me, but most of them are scientists or.
Oh, good. So they know what I mean. When I say a toxin, I mean a real one.
If
not.
we say chemicals, we know.
Yes, we know everything's a chemical.
Yes, we know.
The apple I ate for lunch was indeed a chemical.
Right, and chemical processes.
It's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And biology works on that. But anyway, it's that biomagnification, I think, was coined, that term, out of this book. The idea that something that is in a limited amount as you spray it on the crops, but it goes up the food chain, and then you remember how the food chain works. Many producers, fewer primary consumers, fewer secondary, until you get up to the top consumer in any ecosystem. And now we've got this pesticide accumulating at the top of the food chain, and it was killing off the birds.
Right.
And the particular one she was writing about, although she does mention several, it's DDT.
Right. It's the famous one.
The famous one, the one everyone knows.
Songs,
right.
Which I am here to talk about because one of my things is music. So.
Oh, awesome. Excellent.
Let's see. We have Joni Mitchell's Yellow Taxi.
Oh, right.
That's the name of the song, right? Yellow Taxi, which was covered by Crows, Counting Crows, I think. there's some Ramones song that I can't remember that mentions DDT. And anyway, there's a few
Oh, right.
great classic rock songs that mention DDT that were all inspired. Well, maybe not. Were indirectly or directly inspired by Rachel Carson's work. So, if you're a music fan, then you have her to thank for those songs.
Absolutely.
But yes, okay. So she was born in 1907 in Pennsylvania. And her mom was a retired teacher, and she was very involved in her daughter's life. She had two older siblings. Rachel Carson had two older siblings who were in school, and so she was home with her mom, and her mom would kind of take her into nature and introduce her to all of the plants and the animals and help her to remember the names. And even before she started school, she learned to read and write, and she would write short stories. And she wrote a lot of short stories. She entered a contest with I think it's a poem or a short story called A Battle in the Clouds, which was inspired by her brother who was in the military. If you hear a rustling sound, it's me flipping the page. So she graduated high school in 1925. She was first in her class, and even in her early writing, you can see that she is aware of the effects of humans on nature and the natural world, and she talks about how humans are wasting resources and destroying the environment in the process. And then in the fall of 1925, she attends college at Pennsylvania College for Women.
Go Women's College.
Yes, women's colleges. With a partial scholarship, and she was intending to major in English, but kind of turned her focus to biology when her biology teacher inspired her to study nature and kind of mix the two. Because, again, like we were talking about, there's no... And this is a thing that is one of my favorite things about Montessori, where everything is connected. We don't... It's not as separate. The classes... Our teachers are all in one room. They do multiple things. They teach multiple things. So when we're having one lesson, let's say on how leaves work, our other teacher is teaching us how, to read or write. And so then you can easily kind of go from reading and writing to nature and then end up writing about nature. But, and that's not an exclusive thing to Montessori, but it's kind of just...
I believe it's that notion started with Montessori, I believe.
Yeah,
if I remember my history of ed correctly.
Maria Montessori and her famous teaching style, which was first to aid lower class children, by the way, and now is, almost exclusively for middle class or upper class children. So, wonder how that happened.
While we have lower income children and immigrant children and non-English speaking children drilling and killing to pass. Oh, back to standardized test.
Always back to standardized test. Everything.
I'll stop now. Let's talk about Rachel Carson.
Yes. Okay. So her teacher, Mary Skinker, I believe, had studied at Johns Hopkins and Cornell, which was rare at the time because this is, again, early 1920s. So then Rachel Carson graduated in 1929 from Pennsylvania College for Women, and soon after got accepted to Johns Hopkins, which is where I was born. So I
Go team.
About now. She also received a full scholarship and $200, which, again, we were in the early 1900s, so that's a lot of money. It still is, but anyway. The summer before she was set to attend Johns Hopkins, she spent 6 weeks studying marine biology at Woods Hole Marine Biological Laboratory, which is on the coast of Massachusetts. And if I am remembering correctly, who was I just listening to who also studied there? Can't remember. But it's a famous biology laboratory, and it kind of transformed her into, she knew she liked nature before, but then she started studying it in a more scientific way, and then really, knew that was what she was going to do with her life. So, after Woods Hole, so we're going into the Great Depression, and her family had a lot of financial difficulties. So her mom, her dad, her older sister, and her mom. Maybe not. Okay. I feel like her mom may have passed away a few years before, but I'm mixing up my information. So, anyway, so her family moved in with her in Baltimore, and then in 1932 she received her master's degree, and she had hoped to continue studying at Johns Hopkins, but couldn't because of her financial situation. So she began working at the lab, Johns Hopkins, as well as writing scripts for a radio program. And so she was tasked with writing brochures, which this is like one of the most
It's very interesting.
amazing parts. So she was supposed to be writing these like strictly scientific brochures about, let's say, the okay, this is an example. It may not be completely correct, but like the life cycle of a trout. But she ended up writing, again with the pretty words, like basically a poem about the life cycle of the fish. And
I'll say for young people out there who are not familiar with the idea of a brochure or whatnot, like at this time period in history, that was a way to get information out. Now we listen to a podcast or Google something. So she was writing these pamphlets or brochures for the county extension agency and the different people who might, be trying to grow this particular crop or farm this particular lake. So these were like information distribution technique,
Right.
Which
It
may
wasn't-
sound it wasn't a brochure like trying to sell you something. It was a brochure, like I said, disseminating information. But she wrote them so well and so engagingly that they became a thing.
right.
Like, can you imagine a brochure on, I don't know, elm trees or trout or something that suddenly people are like talking about and suggesting you go get one so you can know more about these elm trees?
It's like if someone was, this is actually kind of outdated, but like if someone was to start talking about like a phone book, like at the time it's like equivalent to, how you may see a phone book. Like it's just purely information. It's not supposed to be fun to read, but she made it into something that was interesting and people could, feel drawn to and want to learn.
And accessible too, I believe.
Right.
Also, like it wasn't just the 5 trout fishermen who wanted to read this, but it felt accessible, I believe, and other people were requesting them. It became a thing, if you can imagine. It became a thing.
That's one of the other like great things about her writing, that usually purely scientific writing is kind of hard to understand unless you are a scientist or have access to scientific information or are exposed to it regularly. But she wrote in a way that was easy to understand for everybody, which in her field of conservation is extremely important because you're not trying to tell scientists what they already know. You're trying to tell the public what they need to know and what they know already, but kind of relate to them in a way that
absolutely.
They feel included in the conversation. So you're not just like, saying, hey, you should be doing this or you should be doing this because you're destroying the planet. You're, talking to them about stuff they
accessible, again, with a really highly accessible and engaging. I think earlier we were saying, I don't know if this will loop back around, but we were saying there are so many of the seminal works in science are actually dreadful reads. As I was saying earlier, I love and adore me some Chucky D, but goodness, wading through Origin of the Species is a torture test. And I would give that a plus gold star for the best idea anyone ever had and the most remarkable idea anyone has ever had.
Yeah.
And an idea that, despite popular thought, in what are we, 150 years out now? More than that.
More.
Nothing has come to light to refute his ideas. And think about what we've discovered in those 150 years.
People have tried, but...
People have tried, but there's been, in that time, we've discovered DNA and how it works.
Right.
And we can sequence it.
See how it's connected to, multiple
And we can
species.
sequence it across species. With CRISPR, we can alter it.
Oh, gosh, let's not get into that.
Yeah. Another elegant idea, but terrifying.
Yeah.
But all of those discoveries supported his basic premise. And that is, again, just remarkable. But the book is a drudge.
Oh, yeah. I am trying to read it right now. I don't know where it is, but
But I think this was Carson's great strength, was that she came with the words. And the words in a very accurate, but very engaging, accessible. Silent Spring is a good read today.
right. It's still relevant. It's
Sure. Especially for, again, like you said, she's not trying to tell scientists what they already know.
Right.
This is for the rest of us. So when she's speaking about, in here she explains engagingly. It's not a textbook, people. Read it. You'll like it. She explains, biomagnification and how that works. I think without even calling it that. Or does she? I can't. Oof. I mean, your guest expert here just fucked that up. But
we have both read some amount of the book, or heard it, or we know what we're talking about.
we really do. We swear.
We promise.
But she describes biomagnification in every line. The idea that, I said, when we're spraying arsenic derivatives on the leaves, that's going to go right up the food chain. And by the time we get to the top of the food chain, we'll be in a higher percent in that organism and cause destruction. We weren't trying to kill the birds. We were trying to kill the weeds or the bugs or whatever. But
Lice. Oh my gosh. The whole thing. Okay, so DDT, we think of it as a pesticide for crops, which was what it was used for. But it was also used for, because this was during World War II, it was widely used to try and eliminate typhus, which is spread by lice. And it was used all around the world, but this one clip or video I watched, or article, I can't remember, was talking about how people would get sprayed head to toe with DDT to prevent the spread of typhus, which, okay, great. But now you have a whole set of other problems that you cannot solve that easily, and that people didn't even know existed at the time. And there's just such horrible videos of people, kids being sprayed. It's so bad.
So when these new age Fruit Loops talk about toxins, they
right.
Let's talk about spraying children with DDT, shall we?
Right. It wasn't thought of as a harmful product at the time until scientists started looking at it and this is bad, and obviously officials weren't listening. They were calling them crazy, and what do scientists know? It's not like they study the thing or anything.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that again, haven't we?
Everywhere, all the time. Not to mention any recent large events that have impacted the entire world.
Nothing to see here. Move along.
No, right. But yeah, so she, being a woman, obviously, women can't control our emotions. We can't do that. We also don't know what we're talking about. We can't be unattached from our work, or specific about it, or we're not professional.
No.
There's no way we could be. I'm being sarcastic, by the way. Just
in case you're missing it.
Sometimes my sarcasm is so good that people can't hear it. So just want to make sure.
I picked up what you were putting down.
Anyway, sarcasm aside, people did not listen to her at all. And even people who, again, just because people are, saying that they don't understand what she's saying, they probably did. But again, they were making money off of it. So,
Yeah. Oh, we have, unfortunately, example after example after example. I mean, remember the tobacco stuff of what would that have been, the late 60s on into the early 70s, how the tobacco companies knew. And that was one of the things that blew the doors off of it. Their own research showed it was a carcinogen.
Right.
But they hid it, dissembled, were evasive, we need more time, we're not really sure, while people were dying of lung cancer.
Same with oil companies
Of
and climate
course.
change, and they knew everything, but they're not.
And again, it's well documented. They know. The cigarette companies knew, and the chemical companies, the DDT producers, knew what her, speaking specifically about Silent Spring, was bringing it to the people,
Right.
and in such an engaging way
Right.
that suddenly your average person cared,
Right.
understood the issue,
Right.
made the connections, and cared about it.
And that's
That is,
the first.
talk about making an impact in science. There are so many things. Another giant in Lynn Margulis and Endosymbiotic Theory is one of the most amazing thoughts ever. But what Carson did was take this to the living rooms of people.
Right.
Any person. If you just pull a random page out of there, it's engaging and accessible, and you don't need a PhD in ecology or biochemistry to get what she's saying. And it's not overly dramatic. It's not, that.
Yeah, and that's like another characteristic, one of her characteristics. She was very calm, even when people, funny, calm, specific about what she was saying. She did her research, but she was calm.
And had I guess there's here, let's get a little plug for the liberal arts, a wonderful ability to understand the science, because you do have that background, you do have that training, you do have that education, but then to add to that the education, training, skill of being a really fabulous writer. Right. I get yelled at about my emails periodically because people ask me if every single email I send out really means F off and die, you lousy heifer. I'm like, well, why would you think that? I'm like, well, I don't know, Angela, it just sounds really terse. And I'm like, I wasn't trying to send you a tersely worded letter.
I hate emails because I go back and read them, especially if I'm like upset. I can't, it's like the thing, you're not supposed to write to anybody if you're upset about something. You're supposed to put it in a drawer and then wait until the next day.
Don't hit send.
Right. But now it's harder because we can just do it on our phones. We can pick it up. We don't actually have to mail it off.
Bang it out and send it off. And it comes off terrifying people. Is she threatening me? So I guess at my own expense, I am a very not great writer. But those who are and can tell the story of science are in desperate need right now, and we need a Silent Spring for the pandemic.
Right.
Really, an engaging, thought-provoking book that makes this is I need something other than a common person, a lay person, get it. Mm-hmm. And get it at a level. Like, we can yell at each other over social media, but that's not the place to build a case. Mm-hmm. And I really believe, I wish we had a Rachel Carson for today.
Right. A new age Rachel Carson.
Right. The modern combination of that extraordinary talent for telling a story in a remarkably accessible way.
And in this copy that I have here, right here, she did not draw these pictures, I don't believe, the illustrations in the book. But like we were talking about, making it relatable or drawing people in any way. So the first page, you see a dogwood, which
right out the window,
literally right.
It's literally starting to bloom. Look at that.
And oh my God, that's a squirrel eating an apple core. How did that happen?
Oh, I threw my apple core out the window. You're welcome, buddy. Well, I don't believe in throwing it away. It's organic.
It's compost.
Right.
I mean, that's what...
Well, it's squirrel food.
Yeah, literally.
For those without the visual, we're watching a squirrel eating my leftover, or the remains of my lunch apple.
On a dogwood tree.
On a dogwood tree.
Yeah.
Ain't nature grand?
It is. Um, anyway, so she starts off the book talking about a fictional, but a fictional town that's composed of like real life examples that she kind of made into a fictional town, and then describes, like kind of what you see right now if you look out the window, depending on where you live. But like blooming trees and clear streams and fields of orchards and bees pollinating plants and all the things that you would hope to see in a healthy ecosystem.
Right.
And then
and the things that I think most people, even people who aren't biologists or naturalists or anything, enjoy. I mean, why is it most people's favorite season is spring?
Right.
These things bring us joy.
Right. Should like it because it means food and warmth.
That coming out of the dark times, but it's remarkable. The renewal of nature is, we can wax on about it as scientists, but it is just remarkable. So she hooks us in with something almost universal, the joy in even the simple animals and plants that are outside our rather urban window here we're looking out. But then goes on after this hooking in description that we all relate to and paints a darker picture.
Right. And she starts talking about how plants start dying, there aren't any bees, the birds, which again is the title, the birds stop singing because they're dead. The fish start dying off, people start getting sick, and okay, let me find my page. I did some research on the CDC page about like the effects on humans because there were a lot. So it's DDT can be spread in all different ways, like we were talking about, through the food chain. You eat a fish that ate a bug or something, you're getting, DDT if the bug ate a plant that had DDT on it, or the bug was sprayed with DDT. Ingest DDT through air, food, or water. Pregnant people can pass DDT onto unborn children. DDT can cause, this is in humans, vomiting, shaking, seizures, and death, which, yeah. So, and then in animals tested in labs, DDT has been shown to affect reproductive organs and cause cancer. So, all of that kind of stuff that you would expect, side effects. But again, remember this was being used very commonly and liberally around places people lived, on people, on the food people ate, literally everywhere. It's kind of disturbing to think about, but yes. Okay, so that's what happened. And this is what she talks about in the book, which I have not actually read all the way through, but the parts that I have read. And then finds a way to relate to people. So, reactions to her book. And so she wrote many books. Some were most were about the ocean. So she had never seen the ocean before she went to Woods Hole to study. But she had read about it and heard about it, and it was like one of her favorite things to think about, and she finally got to see it when she went to college. And that's what, like, a few of her books were dedicated to writing about the ocean and the science of the ocean and the animals that live in it and stuff. But yeah, so she loved the ocean. Her book, Silent Spring, what drew people in to her and her work and the works of scientists that, worked with her and agreed with her about the effects of DDT. She got a lot of very angry people. A lot of people agreed with her. A lot of people loved her book. You have our word. It's great. But some people did not like her work, did not like her. Time magazine labeled her book as oversimplified, and this is a quote, oversimplifications and downright errors. The former Secretary of Agriculture called her communist, which
Oh,
is
of
fun.
course, right?
Right. Because, he's the Secretary of Agriculture, and he believed that pesticides helped grow food, and food equals food security. So if she's attacking food security, she must be a communist. Um,
Sigh.
right, sigh. And she was called hysterical because that's women were hysterical. Funny, common, very common in word to be describe women who are saying something that you don't like or acting in a way that you don't like, or just living, because how dare women live?
How dare we?
People saw her as threatening. People couldn't believe she was a woman and that she was a scientist, because those two things do not go together in the 50s. Which they obviously do. There were lots of female scientists, but, they didn't get the recognition they deserved, and therefore people didn't see them.
Very much unseen. Another way in which she has been, history has unseen Miss Carson. We'll get to that in a minute.
This guy, another guy, they're all guys. Well, there were some women who disagreed with her, but not as many. Dr. Robert White Stevens, who was a former biochemist, said this in response to Rachel Carson's research on DDT. If man, referring to humans, if man were to follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth, which beautifully put, but completely wrong.
Completely wrong. But again, don't you see this echoes of that same argument we keep hearing now? And that's that's the classic straw man fallacy, right? She never called for a ban on DDT, by the way.
Yeah, she agreed that it was necessary to find a way to control pests and diseases, but she disagreed with the way it was being done, which
Exactly.
no one ever talks about because
we want to use a straw man argument. So we have to paint her as some complete, or anybody as some complete loony who's insisting that we go back to the Stone Age, and that's just absurd. We've got to understand that in most basic rule of ecology is truly everything is connected to everything else. And we have to understand the consequences of any action, and the intended and unintended consequences, and balance
stuff
them.
we can't even prepare for because we don't know everything.
Exactly, and we don't know how this will roll out, but when we do have new information, to find other ways to do things. And it is possible. Just because we have this thing now, if we realize that whatever this thing is maybe not the best idea, that doesn't mean we can't find a better one. Or
We
find
know what the problem is. Just because we have one solution does not mean we should use it.
Exactly. But we can't stop smoking cigarettes and reduce cancer, because that would put all these people out of a job who make cigarettes. Well, maybe we need to think about this differently.
Right.
We can't. We have a lot of we can't make things better for the average person because it might bother somebody else.
Right. It's less convenient for the people who are making the money, or the people who have to organize it all, and even though that's their job, but and there's people offering extremely well thought out solutions to problems too that are being ignored because and this again goes back to education.
Absolutely.
May not be in the defined terms of a scientist. Like you look outside and you make an observation, you're a scientist.
Absolutely. It's not although, in light of the pandemic, when everyone suddenly was a virologist.
That's different.
Yeah. But I agree,
right.
You can truly immerse yourself, and I don't mean on Google.
Right.
In nature, and come to understand a lot of things. I agree.
Right. And then again, that does not mean that, and everyone should know that they do not know everything. We should be able to talk with other people and compare our ideas, and as much as we've I was talking about how anyone is a scientist, some things do need to be studied in a certain way to understand them, like
Yeah.
medicine. I'm not suggesting anyone go out and try to perform their own surgeries.
Yes, please don't drink bleach
No.
or
What was that one?
in the horse dewormer
Yeah.
or like, don't do those things.
No.
Those are not scientifically based.
No.
But we can seek knowledge from people who truly do know what they're talking about.
And it is okay to question those people. if you
Oh,
don't agree with them.
absolutely.
But if a lot of people who have studied something, and again, it's still okay to question, but if a lot of people who have studied a certain topic all agree on something, that probably means that they studied it thoroughly and know what they're talking about. Probably.
Yeah, there's a real scientific consensus is a real thing. And if you study the history of science, a little bit ago I mentioned Lynn Margulis, another great woman scientist, and her endosymbiotic theory. See, scientists aren't likely to jump on each other in a like bandwagon-y kind of way. You know, when she endosymbiotic theory is the idea that chloroplast, which carry out photosynthesis in plants, and mitochondria, which carry out cellular respiration, making energy for cells in both plants and animals, that those two organelles, little parts of the cell, originated as free-living prokaryotes, bacteria, and that they were engulfed by early cells and found a symbiotic relationship where they both benefited, and over millions and in fact billions of years became organelles, parts of the cell. When she first proposed this, she was roundly being laughed out of rooms.
Right.
So scientists are not likely, it's just because one scientist puts it out there, everybody else doesn't go, oh yeah, we agree. Usually you get a whole lot of
testing and more testing and
arguing
studying
and
the public doesn't always see that, but it does happen.
Oh, it happens a lot, and
Yeah.
in some ways we do have some troubles with our scientific model, but we can talk about that later.
Which again is part of science. Nothing is perfect.
All right.
Everything is changing, and that's like
Oh yeah, new information is awesome.
Right.
But because of the way we've structured some things, we're not seeing as much redoing of experimentation as we would like. But that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
But the way science works is self-checking. So she came out with this idea based on some of her early research. A lot of people went, "Pfft,
Right.
nah." Right. She continued doing more research. Some other people who went, "Pfft," decided to look into it. And over the decades, I think this was first proposed in the early 70s, maybe late 60s, it went from wacky idea to hypothesis to theory now. It is generally accepted that endosymbiosis is the mechanism by which eukaryotes have these organelles. And so scientists doing checks and balances and trying and testing as it moved through those, from idea to an actual hypothesis, a stated assumption, through the testing of that assumption over and over again and in different ways by different people. As our technology improved and we could start to sequence things and sequence the genes, chloroplasts and mitochondria have their own DNA, which was one of the early,
Right. Like, that's
ideas here. And now this is accepted scientific theory. Understanding how this works maybe would help people understand what is meant by scientific consensus.
Right.
So it wasn't just because Professor Margulis announced this one day and we
She
all
just
went,
woke up and was like, hey, you know what?
you know what's up? And then everybody in science went, yeah, sis, that's
Right.
what's up. When we say we've reached a scientific consensus, it's a long, arduous, cantankerous journey of big egos fighting with each other. And for those of us who are on the education end of science, it's fun to watch these smackdowns happen, where we argue about this piece of minutia, violently and bitterly. But I think if the layperson understood better how this works, we might take more liking to scientific consensus. Like when we talk about, the environment and what we understand now about
And that's-
climate change,
right.
for example.
Oh, gosh.
And pollutions of other kinds, and the idea of biomagnification, which is one of my I remember that being a real light come on moment when I was an undergrad taking ecology, and like, well, duh, but damn,
Right.
this plastic I throw away, it was very upsetting.
Right. Don't litter,
Don't litter, please don't litter.
please.
Absolutely, recycle,
Recycle. Reuse.
get rid of single-use plastics. We
Buy
suck.
things in bulk. You can,
Absolutely.
unless you're not going to use it, in which case it'll be thrown away.
Donate it.
Donate it.
Bring it to a public school. We'll take
Right.
anything. But I think people would take a little more heart in seeing what is meant by scientific consensus. It's not just 50 scientists all said yes.
Right.
It's, tens and thousands and hundreds of thousands of research pieces and done over time before we are saying, yeah, this is probably it. Now, notice the probably.
Right. Probably.
As we like to say, and I'm loath to tell too many people this, but, technically in science, there's no such thing as a fact. As we are always open to new information. But that new information is not some train wreck of an individual, making crap up or selling you some product on the
Trying
internet.
to aid their, separate agenda that they're trying to do, and
Or,
they know the crowd of people they're talking to.
So chaos,
Right.
or whatever you're
Not
at.
to name any names.
No, we're not talking about anyone in particular, are we? No, not a bit. Here's a plug for a great movie that covers this very well. If you haven't seen Contagion,
Yes.
and it will, give you flashbacks to the last 2 years.
Great.
Yeah, it was horrifying. But remember, the movie turns on something that's not likely. Remember,
Right.
the virus mutates to be worse in the movie.
Right.
And that's not the usual MO of an organism, because killing your host is bad.
Because then how will it spread?
Exactly. But it did make for a great movie.
It was very good.
But remember, there's that one character who was selling the
Yeah.
snake oil crap just to
Make money.
make money and sow confusion and sow chaos. And then when we had a real pandemic, we saw that. We saw that in spades. But you can spare yourself from getting stuck on this garbage of all kinds. If somebody's selling you anything to remove toxins from your body, and you are not on a liver transplant list,
Right.
then you are being sold trash.
Right.
You don't need this. If you have a functioning liver and functioning kidneys, you're good to go.
Right. Unless you don't want functioning kidneys. or
Correct.
You can take those. They
By
will
all
help you.
means, enjoy. I don't know. The idea of scientific consensus is a brilliant thing, because it's not easy to achieve. It doesn't happen overnight.
No.
It doesn't happen
But
spontaneously.
It looks like
it
does.
does.
So, kind of, this is why this is all happening, because people look at it and they're like, how could you know this? Because
Right.
it looks like you came up with it overnight, but there's
But this is another thing Rachel Carson's book did for us, was create it. The scientific consensus was already growing that we needed to limit and control pesticide use. And the idea that these things do magnify as we go up the food chain had passed the sniff test, so to speak. So she then helped create consensus among lay people that, yes, if we don't want Silent Spring, if we don't want our all the trout in the lake dead, and we don't want all the bees gone, and
Stop
that's going to
buzzing,
kill our
birds to stop
talk about
singing.
killing the food system,
right.
our food chains, and our crop system still relies on bees, believe it or not.
Bees.
Like, crops that we grow globally still need pollinators.
Yep. We rely, that's another thing that I was thinking about the other day, kind of is related, but how we don't see ourselves as part of nature. which is
That's
so
yes.
many problems in the way of thinking that we are separate.
We are
not.
separate.
Like,
we're
what,
not.
What happened? We just appeared on the planet? No, we know we evolved on this planet, so we are part.
Well, remember that some of our
this.
mythology does have humans appearing as separate from and given dominion over, and I think that's some of the problem.
Right. I mean, it's to me that's one of the biggest things, because if you are able to separate yourself enough from something, insert racism or destruction of the planet, you can destroy anything. You can harm it as much as you want, because if you don't see yourself as part of it, you don't see yourself as being impacted or impacted.
Out of the mouths of the next generation, people. We're in good hands. We're in very good hands. If my generation and older would just hurry up and take several seats. Yes, you're exactly right. If you divorce yourself from it, if you feel divorced from it, you don't care about it, or you wish to continue down this road. And here's the thing, though, we are not separate from nature. One of my favorite things to talk to AP biology about, the genes we share with every single other organism, referred to often as the conserved sequence or the ancient conserved sequence, the genes that begin glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose, glycolysis, which begins respiration. It begins the energy-making process. Every single organism on Earth does this process. From bacteria to your mama, we all got to do this, right? The tree and the bee, those sequence of genes that run these processes are very well conserved, meaning we've all got almost identical DNA. So we share these genes, and these had to be the genes that began life, right? Beginning metabolism would be the beginning of a cell. And I've always thought that these sorts of knowledge, this sort of thing, was beautiful. Like, I love the notion that I am very deeply connected to every other living thing. It's mind-blowing, but it's beautiful.
Right. And being able to connect, whatever that is, if you're an artist, connect art to your understanding, or scientist to...
Absolutely.
We can all see the beauty, the amazing, just the sheer amazingness of everything and us and everything. Again, everything. And then being able to connect whatever your thing is, science, to understanding how just it amplifies how amazing this is.
Very much. And amplifies that way deep down connection. Like, you are literally related to. Right. Remember, your DNA is handed down. You are literally related to everything else on the planet. And if we share genes with every single other species, imagine the level of genetic connectedness of our own species. And
we're all related.
Very related.
Whether or not we like to admit it.
Exactly. And we're finding out, thanks to Ancestry, that we're more related than we thought. As people discover that they have a Jewish heritage they didn't know about, or an African American heritage they didn't know about, or
I mean, it's that aspect,
but,
DNA tests.
But imagine this connectedness is real. We are truly related.
On the smallest scale and the largest.
Absolutely. And if we understood that better, I wonder if we would be better humans.
Right. And
so everyone should take biology.
Everyone
should study
it shouldn't be, because then people would just, not shouldn't be, but if it wasn't and people just automatically liked it without the tests and all the things.
Well, if we could get rid of the testing in the baby biology. In fact,
people would love it.
This is my conspiracy theory. That thing goes around, pick a conspiracy theory that you actually do believe. Here's the one I believe.
There's one on Twitter, I think.
Yeah. They put this mandatory test on the biology class
to get people to not study it.
And hate it and never want to see it again and not trust it, because all we have time to do is just lob facts at children.
Right. So then they can pass the class and pass the test, so they can go on, which what you have to do to help the kid, and then you're,
What we're doing, though, is killing any
Right.
interest in love because we don't want people to know the truth.
Right.
The truth is out there, people. Take a biology class.
read a book, take a biology class.
Absolutely.
Listen to a podcast, preferably this one.
Yes, absolutely. Listen and listen often.
But yeah, it's just the importance of education, and it doesn't have to be this mandatory thing we all
Slog through like a
slog
trip through hell.
or hate or automatically associate with negative emotions. It should be entertaining and engaging and something that
Yes, can we
makes us want to study and
be
or
part
paint
of it,
or,
and paint, dance.
Dance.
What was the first thing that both No Child Left Behind and then exacerbated by Race to the Top got rid of in schools? The arts.
Right.
Because we don't have time. We have to do test prep.
There's quotation marks that you can't see.
Yes, we have to raise test scores. And to do that, we have jettisoned recess for children. Are you kidding me?
We know that kids need an hour of exercise
At
every day.
least.
At least.
And we have jettisoned, the theater programs, and we've slashed funding for music and dance, all to be slave to some fucking bubble-in test. Right. I know I keep working back around to, I guess you can tell we're coming up on testing season at school. So I guess you can tell where my mind is as a teacher. But a woman scientist, and remember when this book came out, there was no EPA, by the way. It's jumping tracks a little bit. The EPA didn't come out to the Nixon administration, right? The 70s, the Environmental Protection Agency.
As much as we all,
he
don't
did
like
some
him,
good
he
things.
did some good stuff.
No, he was terrible and a crook.
Right.
And
But,
a liar.
One is one thing, which is, it would be so much easier if we could
they
just
were,
label
I know,
people
right?
as horrible people. It would be so much easier.
Two
if they were just
categories:
black and white.
angels and son of a bitch, and that's it. And that's not the way it works. But he did start the Environmental Protection Agency, and I believe 70, 71 too, somewhere in there. And I think a lot of that desire to protect the environment, the realization that we had to protect the environment.
It's not a question.
Yeah, right.
Anymore. It's a thing we know.
And
we
that
should
was-
all want to do it, but we need to do it as well.
We need to do it because we don't have any planet B.
No.
There's no planet B for us to jettison off to. And I think you can draw a direct line from Carson's work to the EPA. That
I mean, she directly impacted the Endangered Species Act and
absolutely.
Those Environmental Protection Agency, all of that stuff that we now have is thanks to her and scientists like her that we don't even know about today because they weren't acknowledged or
not near as acknowledged.
Right.
But she brought this to the forefront via her writing, going back to the pamphlets that she started making, which is just kind of hysterical when you think about it, but that those became, in effect, a runaway hit. Imagine that. People were requesting these things. On to her books, and of course the most famous one, Silent Spring. And I just can't say enough. If you've never read it, or you read it years ago for a class, and it felt like because sometimes...
Again, with the mandatory things.
Sometimes mandatory is just not a pleasant word. If you haven't read it, I really encourage you to pick it up and try it again. You maybe especially in the spring.
In the spring, outside.
Outside, go outside and read it in the spring. Because I think looking back, her major thesis has certainly been borne out. Now we can quibble about. But remember, she never said we can never use DDT ever. She said we needed to cut way back and only use it
in the United States.
Right, where we had to. And we do know that DDT is effective for malaria. And they are using it in some places in Africa, I believe, where malaria is
in,
a huge concern.
Right.
But if you know the dangers, then you can use it sparingly. You can use it in controlled ways. We can take safety precautions around humans, but yet still address malaria, which is huge and a big problem.
There was some, I think it was a National Geographic article that popped up the other day, and it was about how, I didn't actually read it, but the title kind of speaks for itself, but how using pesticides to kill cockroaches is actually making them stronger, which we all hate cockroaches, but they are really resilient animals.
Oh, yes.
They're pretty interesting.
Well, and that's a great example of natural selection gone wrong.
Right.
Back to our friend Chucky D. We're exposing them to a chemical, so those with a natural little bit of immunity live.
And they pass that on to
And
their
they pass on it,
offspring.
and over time, that becomes the dominant allele in the genome, and they're now all immune to whatever this we're spraying on them.
Right.
And that's the way antibiotic resistance works, and why it is so dangerous to take antibiotics when you don't need them, or to take them inappropriately. You are breeding a better bacteria when you do that. And we don't mean a better bacteria like helpful. We mean a more deadly bacteria. And we have to understand those things in order to do better.
Right.
And I think she was one of the, like I said, there's so many here in Women's History Month, so many wonderful women scientists that did not get the spotlight they ought to have had.
Many of which were women of color or
Oh, absolutely.
LGBTQ plus people or
Absolutely.
marginalized groups of people who.
Well, that's another way in which Rachel Carson was erased.
Right.
We can talk about gay and bisexual erasure in history.
Right.
A whole bunch of letters between her and another woman that are extremely intimate, with lots of "I love you more than anything in the world" kind of phrasing in there. That certainly would lead us to believe. I believe they did the same thing to Emily Dickinson, right? We sort of erased that. I believe there's a similar history of literature. I'm not as up on as history of science, but that that part was erased. Like, we don't talk about that. We don't acknowledge that this very adept writer, probably choosing her words with intention,
Right.
was writing very clear love letters and exchanging. Hundreds of them are still around, and they believe some of the early ones may have been destroyed because there are certain gaps in the correspondence that may be some relatives or maybe the women themselves. So yes, to your point that erasure of women, certainly erasure of women's accomplishments, and certainly
Our existence entirely.
our existence entirely is being erased. But we also, particularly women of color and LGBTQ women, marginalized, sidelined, ignored, instead of celebrated for contributions that have made our world truly a better place. I mean, I'm really glad we still have birds.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really glad.
Yep.
I think that's, thank you, Rachel Carson. I'm pretty fucking glad we still have birds and bees.
Wake up and hear.
And right outside my
robins.
window here, the dogwood is just getting ready to bloom, and there's a squirrel sitting in it eating an apple. And that's pretty awesome. I love it.
No words to describe the amount we should be thanking all of these people.
Absolutely.
And probably, if I could speak for them, I would probably say they would hope that our actions would speak instead of our words. So
Yeah, exactly. That we would heed their messages and go forward as better humans. So I think that's why I still teach school. I still believe that if we can just make people understand science a little better.
That was the episode about Rachel Carson. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's been a joy. Thank you for
Yes.
inviting me on. I had a great time. And I would love to come back sometimes.
Yes.
I talk for a living, so I I will talk
Professional
endlessly.
talker.
I'm a professional talker. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you. It's a real joy, and I'm super excited about your generation. Go get them, Tiger.
Man, I hope do some good.
Well, we're pulling from you. Go get them.
All right.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Okay, so that was the episode about Rachel Carson. I had a lot of fun making this episode, and thank you guys so much for listening. I know this one was really long. Yeah, thank you.